Welcome to Galactic Nova Stories, where cosmic emotions come to life. Your journey begins now. The desert winds whispered across the silent dunes as Aria stood alone beside the gleaming rover, her heart heavy with a loneliness she had long stopped trying to fight. The day's heat still shimmered faintly off the metal surface, but the air was cooling fast, touched by the chill that came with the twin suns sinking behind the jagged cliffs. She adjusted the strap of her utility pack absently, fingers lingering at her hip as she gazed into the bleeding sky. Violets, deep golds, burnt oranges swirling together in a slow, mournful dance. The colony outpost flickered in the distance, a handful of steel domes clinging to the vastness like stubborn survivors. Inside them, the rest of the crew finished preparations for departure, their laughter and clipped orders filtering faintly through her comm link. But Aria didn't move, couldn't. A strange pull like an invisible hand at her chest kept her rooted at the edge of the landing bay, staring into the growing dark where the desert swallowed the horizon whole. She shivered and wrapped her arms around herself, more for comfort than warmth. This planet, Juno 4, was supposed to have been barren, lifeless, just another waypoint catalogued and forgotten. Yet from the first day they'd touched down, she'd felt something, watching, waiting. Every night, when the stars wheeled into view and the air turned glass thin, she dreamed of eyes she couldn't see, of voices that hovered just out of hearing. She closed her eyes, letting the desert sounds wash over her. The sigh of sand shifting, the metallic creak of cooling machinery, the occasional crackle of static in her comm. In the background, the AI assistant's soft monotone updated their launch sequence. They were leaving tonight. Juno 4 would soon be another mark in the ship's log, another story of emptiness, another goodbye. Aria pressed her forehead gently against the cool metal of the rover. Maybe that's all I'm meant to be, she thought, a wanderer collecting empty goodbyes. A flicker of movement caught the corner of her eye. She stiffened, turning her helmet's light toward it, but there was nothing, only the long rippling shadow of the dunes under the dying light. Her fingers hovered over the stun pistol at her belt, a reflex more than a threat. Whatever was out there didn't feel hostile. If anything, it felt fragile, curious, lonely. She shook her head. You're tired. Imagination. Still, her heart pounded harder, as if deep down something inside her recognized what her mind refused to. Then, a sound. A soft, unearthly hum filtered through her neural link receiver. Not mechanical, not environmental. It was something alive. Aria's breath caught. She froze, scanning the empty expanse. The hum grew louder, coiling around her senses, filling her chest with a weightless ache. It wasn't a sound, not exactly. More like a thought threaded with sorrow, braided with desperate hope. Her scanner, still clipped to her belt, flickered wildly, struggling to lock onto the source. Hands trembling, she lifted it, trying to triangulate, but the signal was everywhere and nowhere at once. Then came the voice, fragile, wavering, threaded, with a sorrow so raw it cracked something inside her. Take me with you. It wasn't spoken aloud, it was pressed gently against the edges of her mind like a whispered dream. Aria gasped and spun toward the sound, the scanner slipping from her grip and landing in the sand with a muted thud. The dunes stretched before her, silent and vast. Nothing moved. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. Galactic. Nova Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. She fumbled for the scanner, her gloves brushing against something that wasn't sand, something softer, impossibly delicate. She jerked her hand back instinctively. Fear, flashing through her. Heart hammering, she shone her light downward. There was nothing there. Just shifting dunes and scattered fragments of ancient stone half buried in the earth. But for an instant, she could have sworn, no, felt, the outline of fingers brushing hers. Slim, trembling, warm. She rose slowly, scanning the darkness again. Something had been here, Something still was here, watching unseen but painfully close. The signal on her scanner still pulsed softly, like a heartbeat trying to match her own. Her mind spun, grasping for logical explanations. Stress, hallucination. The atmosphere affecting the neural link. But deep down, past the training and rational thought, a quieter, older part of her understood. You are not alone. A memory surfaced without warning. A night on her homeworld, years ago, standing barefoot in the rain after her mother's funeral. Looking up at the endless sky and wondering if someone somewhere was looking back at her. Wondering if loneliness was a language the universe itself spoke. Her throat tightened painfully. Tears prickled at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away, setting her jaw. She moved forward, one step, then another, toward the hatch that led into the abandoned subterranean ruins they had only just begun to survey. The faint prints in the sand caught her light. Narrow, light, unlike any known life form they had catalogued on Juno 4. Not human. Not of this world. Her gloved hand hovered over the controls of the hatch. She could call for backup. She could wait for the others. But instinct told her that if she hesitated, if she let fear dictate her steps now, she would lose whatever fragile thread was stretching between her and the unseen voice forever. Her fingers brushed the keypad, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The voice returned, fainter this time and trembling with barely contained despair. "Please." The hatch shuddered and slid open with a whisper of displaced air. A warm gust, carrying the scent of minerals and something sweetly unfamiliar, kissed her faceplate. Beyond, a spiraling staircase descended into velvety darkness, lit only by the scattered luminescence of ancient alien markings along the walls. Somewhere down there something waited for her. Somewhere down there someone needed her, and Aria knew, as surely as she knew her own name, that her life would never be the same again. Aria hesitated at the threshold, the yawning mouth of the ancient staircase stretching down before her, like a wound torn into the planet itself. Her helmet light struggled against the darkness, revealing only fragments, carvings half erased by time, strange geometric symbols that seemed to shimmer when she wasn't looking directly at them. Each step downward was like a heartbeat slowing, heavy and deliberate. She pressed one hand to the wall for balance, feeling the faint thrum of energy vibrating through the stone, alive somehow, as if the place itself remembered. Her breath fogged the inside of her visor. She was acutely aware of every beat of her heart, every shift of the air against her skin, every whisper of static brushing her neural link. Logic screamed at her to turn back, call for her team, follow the protocol drilled into her bones over countless missions. But a softer voice, the one that had survived heartbreak, exile, and loneliness, urged her on. At the bottom of the stairs, the passage widened into a long, vaulted chamber. Soft bioluminescent vines curled along the ceiling, casting a muted, ethereal glow over the space. The floor was smooth, almost glass-like, reflecting her light in broken, rippling patterns. In the center of the room stood a figure, not human, not machine, slender, fragile. Luminous skin pale as starlight, large, dark eyes that shimmered like pools of deep water, reflecting more sorrow than Aria had ever thought possible. The figure stood motionless, hands clasped against its chest, head bowed slightly, as if unsure whether it had the right to hope. Its body language was achingly familiar, timid, vulnerable, waiting for rejection. Aria's breath caught. For a long moment neither of them moved. The silence between them was a living thing, fragile and trembling. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, the being lifted its gaze to meet hers. Aria staggered under the weight of the emotions pouring through the bond between them. Fear, longing, weariness older than lifetimes, and beneath it all, hope. Tentatively, Aria lowered her weapon belt, letting it fall to the floor with a muted clatter. She raised both hands, palms open, heart hammering in her chest. "I'm not here to hurt you," she thought, praying the gesture would translate across whatever gulf separated them. The being's lips parted slightly, but no sound emerged. Instead, Aria felt a warm nudge against her consciousness, clumsy, tentative, like a child reaching out in the dark. She opened herself to it, loosening the tight walls she'd built around her mind after so many years of duty and survival. Images flooded her. a garden of impossible flowers blooming under violet suns. A city of crystal and silver, abandoned, overgrown with sorrow. A desperate escape, running from something vast and cruel. Loneliness, endless loneliness, stitched into every breath. Aria staggered under the force of it, gasping, tears slipping, free and trailing down her cheeks. The being recoiled slightly, guilt flashing through the bond. "No," Aria said aloud, voice breaking, shaking her head fiercely. She stepped closer. "It's okay, I'm here." The being trembled visibly. Then, with emotion so human it made Aria's heart ache, it extended a hand toward her. Fingers long and delicate, trembling with hesitation. Aria stared at the offered hand, understanding the enormity of this gesture. Trust was not given lightly between any two souls, human or otherwise. And yet, here it was, offered across the void of species, history, and grief. Slowly, reverently, she reached out her own gloved hand. The tips of her fingers brushed the being's skin, and a jolt of sensation rippled through her. Warmth, sorrow, fragile hope. The being's touch was impossibly soft, like the first brush of a snowflake, and yet it anchored her more firmly than any gravity ever could. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. There was only Aria, the alien, and the silent exchange of two lonely hearts, finding each other across the endless expanse of the universe. Somewhere deep in the ruins, a soft rumbling echoed, a reminder that time was slipping away, that her team would soon come searching, that the moment would not last forever. The being's voice, softer now, trembling on the edge of despair, whispered again inside her mind, "Please, don't leave me here." Aria's throat tightened. Tears blurred her vision as she squeezed. The being's hand gently, a silent promise she didn't yet know how to keep. I won't, she didn't know how, she didn't know if she could. But in that moment she knew she would not, could not leave this soul behind. Above them, the lights from the ship pulsed once, twice. An urgent summons back to the known, the safe, the expected. Aria turned her body, sheltering the alien behind, her shielding them both from the world that would never understand, and far above the stars spun silently on, waiting to see what choice she would make. The tension in the air was palpable as Aria stood protectively before the alien being, every instinct in her body screaming of the dangers ahead. Up above, the comlink on her wrist flickered to life, with a soft chime, Captain Reyes's voice cutting through the fragile stillness. "Aria, report. Launch in 20 minutes. Where the hell are you?" She closed her eyes briefly, guilt slashing across her. 20 minutes. 20 minutes to abandon this planet. 20 minutes to abandon this life. This fragile soul who now clung to her hand with a desperate strength that belied its delicate appearance. She pressed a finger to the comm to mute it, heart pounding so loud it was almost painful. They wouldn't understand, she thought. They would see a liability, an unknown threat, a specimen to study or worse, destroy. Her hand tightened gently around the alien's. The being's eyes, black as the void between stars, searched her face, trying to read the decision she hadn't yet spoken aloud. A soft pulse of emotion brushed her mind again. Not words, but a vivid impression. Fear of cages, fear of blinding lights and cold clinical hands, fear of ending, not death, but a hollow oblivion, a life erased. Aria's stomach twisted painfully. How many times had she felt that same fear, standing at the edges of crowded stations, watching people pass her by without seeing her? How often had she dreamed of someone, anyone, who would look at her and choose her without hesitation, and now when it mattered most, she was the one who had to choose. She knelt carefully, bringing herself to the being's eye level. The ground was cold against her knees, and the scent of the underground chamber, sweet, mineral, ancient, filled her lungs. "I don't even know your name," she whispered, voice cracking. The being tilted its head slightly. Then, slowly, an image formed in her mind, a bright point of light descending into darkness, a whisper of music, the feeling of falling, endlessly falling, and still hoping for wings. Not a name in the way humans used names, but a feeling, a memory, a hope. Aria smiled through the tears blurring her vision. Then I'll call you Solin, she said softly. Little star. The being, Solin, trembled, a shudder passing through its slim frame, and a flash of gratitude, fierce and overwhelming, lit the bond between them. Above, her comm crackled again, this time with sharper urgency. 10 minutes to departure. Last call for boarding. Aria, respond immediately. The ship's engines were spinning up now, low tremors shuddering through the ground even here deep below the surface. Dust trickled from the ancient carvings above. The countdown had truly begun. Aria rose slowly to her feet, pulling Solin up, with her. The being staggered slightly, unsteady, as if unused to such gravity, or perhaps worn thin by years of loneliness. Aria steadied them instinctively, wrapping one arm around Solin's narrow shoulders. The contact sent another wave of warmth through her, a silent song of trust so raw it threatened to undo her completely. The hatch above, her way out, loomed like a bright eye against the ceiling. But how could she bring Solin aboard without alerting the others? Without putting both of them at risk? A plan, fragile and desperate, began to take form. The emergency cargo hold, unmonitored, rarely checked once loaded. If she could slip inside during the final boarding rush, conceal Solin beneath her environmental gear, it might just work. Or it might get both of us killed. Aria looked down at Solin, at the way the being trusted her without question, even now. Even with fear coiling in the bond between them like smoke. I have to try, stay close, she whispered, voice fierce and low. No matter what happens, don't let go. Solin nodded once solemnly and clutched at the fabric of her suit with trembling fingers. Together, they moved. Up the spiraling staircase, feet silent against the ancient stone. Through the ruined hatch and out into the biting night air. The stars had come out in full force now, scattering across the heavens in rivers of cold silver. Aria's ship, the Nomad, hovered above the landing bay, its great engines casting harsh white light across the dunes. Shadows stretched long and distorted across the sand. Crew members rushed to and fro, securing equipment, finalizing checks, barking orders. Aria slipped through the chaos, keeping Solin pressed close against her side, her heart hammering so loudly. She was sure someone would hear it and turn. They passed within meters of Captain Reyes. He looked up briefly, a frown tugging at his brow, then barked into his wristcom, distracted, and turned away. Aria exhaled a shaky breath, not daring to slow. At the base of the loading ramp, she spotted the emergency cargo crates, already sealed and ready for final inspection. With trembling hands, she pulled open one of the lighter containers, barely big enough for two. She turned to Solin. This is going to be tight and dark, but I promise I won't leave you. Solin hesitated for only a fraction of a second before stepping inside, curling into the cramped space with a trust that broke Aria's heart anew. She layered spare gear over Solin's slim form, careful not to crush, but enough to hide the shape. Her hands moved with mechanical efficiency, but her throat burned with emotion. The crate's hatch sealed with a soft hiss. Aria rested her forehead against the cold metal, whispering so only she and the stars could hear. Hold on. Turning, forcing her face into the mask of duty she had worn for so long, she strode up the ramp toward her future, toward danger, toward uncertainty, toward the terrifying, fragile hope that had kindled in the darkness. Behind her, unseen by anyone else, a faint shimmer of light outlined the crate, like a tiny, hidden star clinging stubbornly to existence. The ship's engines roared to life, a mechanical thunder vibrating through the hull as the Nomad ascended into the cold expanse of space. Aria's pulse still raced in time with the ship's thrusters, but her heart had already broken free. Suspended between the weight of duty and the pull of the unknown, she glanced back toward the cargo hold, the door securely locked where Solin lay hidden, silent, waiting. Every shift in the ship's motions felt like a reminder of the invisible barrier she had just crossed. How would she explain this to the crew? How would she justify taking on a being that was far from human? There were regulations, protocols, and if they discovered Solin, there would be no discussion, there would be no choice. Aria? Captain Reyes's voice crackled through her earpiece, cool and steady. Too steady. Yes, Captain, she replied, swallowing hard, trying to keep her voice neutral. Everything all right with you? You were cutting it close down there." The question was too casual, too normal, and yet, underneath it, Aria could sense the familiar sharpness that accompanied Rhea's every move. He knew something was off. He always knew. "I'm fine," she said quickly. Her words clipped, her hands tightening around the rail as the nomad pierced the atmosphere. Her gaze drifted toward the cockpit window, where the stars bled into the darkness of the void. "Just some interference in the comms. I'll check the diagnostics later." "Sure, whatever you say." The line cut. Aria let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A thin film of sweat had gathered across her brow. She wiped it away, steeling herself against the ever-present tension. She needed to keep her wits sharp. The crew wouldn't. Buy this forever. She turned, heading toward the storage bay. There was no turning back now. The cargo hold door was still locked, but she needed to check, needed to see that Solin was still there, still safe. The air was thick with the strange energy of the ship's internal systems, but it did nothing to quell the ache in her chest, the ache of a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. Reaching the door, she pressed her palm against the panel, and a soft hiss of hydraulics followed as it slid open. She peered inside. There, curled within the crate, Solin lay motionless. The soft shimmer of its skin was barely visible in the dim light of the hold, a faint pulse of light tracing the contours of its fragile form. For a moment, Aria thought it might be asleep, but then she saw the flicker of its eyes, wide, luminous, reflecting the quiet desperation of a soul lost among the stars. Solin sat up slowly, its movements deliberate and pained. "Solin," Aria whispered, kneeling beside the crate. "Are you okay?" A soft pulse of warmth brushed her mind, an echo of emotion, an affirmation, but not quite. There was a stillness in Solin's presence, a quiet that felt too heavy, too loaded with something unsaid. The bond between them had deepened in the quiet moments of shared isolation, but now it was thick with a quiet unease. Solin's voice, the one that only Aria could hear, whispered, "I'm not like you." Aria's breath caught in her throat. She had known this, of course. The differences were undeniable, the physical form, the way it thought, the way it felt, but the way Solin spoke it made something twist deep within her. She swallowed, searching for words, for the reassurance she wasn't sure she had the right to give. "You're more than like me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're you, and that's enough. That's everything." Solin's eyes flickered, a reflection of what might have been hope or perhaps a fragile longing. "Why do you fear me?" the being asked, its thoughts tentative and trembling. "Why do you hide me?" The question struck Aria like a sharp blow. "Why do I hide you?" She hadn't thought of it like that. She had acted on instinct, on a need to protect, a need to keep them both safe. She didn't want to admit that it was fear. Fear of what would happen if the others found out, fear of what they would do to Solin. "I don't want to hide you," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. I don't want them to hurt you. I don't want you to be alone." Solin studied her for a long moment, its gaze softening. Another wave of gratitude washed over her. It didn't understand everything, but it understood that. There was a distant hum of engines from the cockpit, a signal that they were approaching their destination. Aria glanced up, her pulse quickening. She needed to move. She needed to get Solin to safety before they arrived. The thought of explaining this to Reyes or anyone on the crew felt impossible. "Stay here, okay?" Aria said, standing quickly. "I'm going to make sure everything's clear. When it's safe, I'll come back for you." She could feel Solin's reluctance through the bond, a hesitation in the alien's thoughts. The being didn't want to be hidden away anymore. It wanted to be seen, to be known. The echo of that desire tugged at Aria's heart, but she knew the risks. The longer Solin stayed concealed, the more dangerous it would be. "I'll return, I promise," Aria said firmly. Before she could step away, however, Solin's hand, unseen, hidden beneath the shadows of the crate, reached for hers. "Please, don't forget me." The words, so soft, so full of vulnerability, pierced her like a blade. Aria squeezed its hand. "I could never forget you." As she closed the crate door behind her, She felt that final pulse of warmth, like a star flickering out. Brave, yet afraid to shine too brightly. She took a deep breath and moved toward the corridor, determined to face whatever would come next. To face Reyes, to face the crew, to face the truth of what she was carrying aboard this ship. But as the cargo hold door hissed shut, Aria couldn't help but wonder, what will I do when they ask what's in the crate, and could she live with herself if the truth tore them all apart? The stars stretched before them like the endless depths of an ocean, each one a quiet promise of something greater, something unreachable. The Nomad hummed gently through the cosmos, carrying its passengers forward, toward the unknown. Aria leaned against the cool metal wall of the hallway, her hand resting against the comm panel. There was a quiet thrum beneath her fingertips, the pulse of a ship that had seen too many journeys and far too many secrets. Her own secrets now. The ship's interior was alive with motion, crew members moving through the corridors, preparing for their next stop, finalizing repairs from the last mission. But Aria didn't see any of them. Her mind was consumed by what was waiting in the cargo hold. Solin. She couldn't shake the feeling that the air on the Nomad had changed since she'd locked that door. The tension between duty and desire, between the endless pull of her human life and the gravity of what she had chosen, what she had become, was pressing in on her chest. A sharp voice broke through her reverie. Aria. Captain Reyes stood at the end of the hall, his expression unreadable. There was no warmth in his eyes, but there never had been. He was a man of duty, a man who didn't tolerate weakness, and as far as he was concerned, Aria's lapse in judgment was a betrayal to that code. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his tone low, almost a growl. "I don't take kindly to people hiding things from me, Lieutenant." Aria swallowed, turning away slightly, trying to steady the storm rising in her chest. She had never been good at lying, never been good at masking the truth. And now, more than ever, the weight of her decision felt suffocating. "I haven't been hiding anything," she said, her voice steady, though her heart thudded like a drum. Reyes took a step closer, his boots making sharp echoes on the metal floor. He paused, just out of reach, eyeing her with an intensity that felt like it could pierce through to her very soul. "You've been acting strange. Too strange." She didn't say anything, didn't dare to meet his gaze. Instead, her mind flashed back to the promise she had made, her promise to Solin. And it was in that moment, in the stillness of her resolve, that she realized the truth she had been running from. If she was going to carry this secret, carry Solin into the future, she would have to choose. She would have to choose to live with the consequences of this bond, to live with the truth of who Solin was and what they meant to each other. Aria met Reyes's gaze then, her spine straightening, her breath steadying. There was no more running. "There's something you don't know, Captain," she said softly. "Something you'll never understand." Reyes' eyes flickered, but before he could respond, the comms buzzed again. This time it was a familiar voice, a quiet voice, but one that held more power than anything Aria had heard in years. "Aria, please, come quickly." It was Solin. Aria's pulse surged. She could feel the quiet distress in the call, the tremble in the alien's thoughts, echoing through the bond between them. Without thinking, she turned and rushed down the corridor, her feet pounding against the floor. Reyes shouted something behind her, but she didn't hear it. She couldn't hear it when she reached the cargo hold. The door was already open. She stepped inside, breath hitching as she found Solin standing, no longer curled into the safety of the crate, but standing tall, its shimmering form glowing softly in the low light. The being's gaze met hers with a quiet urgency, a message in its eyes. "I've been waiting," Solin whispered, its voice a low hum in her mind. There was something new in the being's tone, something raw, something alive with possibility. Aria moved closer, her heart racing. She reached out a hand instinctively, but Solin stepped back, just out of reach. "No," Solin said, its voice more certain this time. "Not yet. You must listen. I cannot stay." Aria's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean? I don't—" Solin's eyes softened, a trace of sorrow in their depths. The being reached out then, touching her hand gently, and the bond between them flared with a surge of emotion, of longing, of regret, of hope. I have waited too long, Solin said, the words gentle but weighted. I came to you for a reason. Aria, but I cannot stay here, not in this world, not anymore. Aria's chest tightened, as though the air itself had been stolen from her lungs. But No, Solin interrupted, its voice calm, yet filled with an undeniable finality. I gave you the choice, Aria. I showed you my heart, my soul, and now I must go. A wave of warmth flooded through her, the sensation of Solin's presence wrapping around her like a tender embrace. And in that moment, Aria understood. It wasn't that Solin didn't want to stay, it was that it couldn't. It was part of something larger, something beyond what she could hold on to. Aria's tears were silent as she reached for Solin one last time, but the being only smiled, softly, a light that didn't need words. I'll always be with you, Solin whispered, and before Aria could respond, the light around the being flared, and it began to fade. Solin? No? Aria's voice broke, but it was too late. The being was gone, leaving only the echo of its warmth, of its presence, lingering in the stillness of the cargo hold, and Aria stood alone. Captain Reyes had entered behind her, his face unreadable as he watched the space where Solin had been. His gaze shifted to Aria, then back to the empty room. But he said nothing. The ship hummed around them, its systems functioning as they always had, indifferent to the broken piece of Aria's heart. Are you okay? Reyes finally asked, his voice softer now, almost concerned. Aria didn't answer. She didn't need to. There were no words for this, there was no way to explain. And maybe, just maybe, there wasn't supposed to be. As the stars continued their endless dance outside the ship's windows, Aria felt the weight of the universe press upon her, both cruel and beautiful, impossible to hold, impossible to ignore. She had touched a life that was never meant for her, but in doing so she had touched something far more important than any mission, any assignment. She had touched a soul. And for a moment that was enough. The ship glided silently onward through the stars, and somewhere in the depths of space, the echo of Solin's presence lingered, a quiet whisper on the wind. If this story moved you, share it with someone who loves powerful tales from distant worlds. Don't forget to like and let us know in the comments, what would you have done?